Hi, I'm David Yack, and I'm glad to have you here today as we look at how you can edit the command bar, add buttons, and implement the logic using PowerFX. Whether you've been doing this for years using Ribbon Workbench or other tools, or are new to this and this is the first button you've added, I'm going to walk you through the basics, and then we'll look at how to use the designer, and then I'm going to turn you loose to do the hands-on labs where you'll implement your own buttons and your own logic, and I'll be there to support you if you run into any problems as you go through the hands-on labs. Let's go ahead and get started. The command bar is a bar that has different commands, like you can see on here: show, chart, new, delete, refresh, email a link. You'll find the command bar at various places in the Power Apps model-driven application, and going forward in the converged application that brings together both Canvas and model-driven applications in one designer. Now, what we're going to be looking at in this course is how you can edit this to add new buttons and set the action. So the way to think of a command bar button is that when a user clicks it, they expect some action to happen. And that action is what we're going to be looking at using either JavaScript or, even better, PowerFX to do the action or the logic when the user clicks the button. I'm here in a model-driven application that is the Innovation Challenge app that you get with the samples, and I just wanted to highlight where the command bars are and a couple of things about them. I'm clicked on Challenges, which is one of the tables that has a list of records in here, and you can see at the top here I've got my command bar, and if I click on one of these buttons in the command bar, you'll see something happen or some action taken, and that's what users expect from command bar items that they find on there. You'll notice that not all the buttons look the same. For example, some of these have the flyouts. Those are a little bit more complex buttons, and we'll talk about those in some of the limitations with the first round of the command bar designer that we're going to see. Now, if I go back and click on one of the records, you'll see that on the form view, we also have a command bar that is there. And one of the things I wanted to highlight here is you'll notice that there's a little ... and things overflow. So if you have too many things in your command bar, you will overflow. And so one of the things we'll talk about when we're designing command bars and adding new buttons or reorganizing them, we want to make sure that the ones that are used the most and make the most sense are furthest to the left, giving access, and that way they won't flow off the screen. And obviously this will adjust if I were to change my screen resolution. You would see less real estate for being able to show those and hide the buttons that didn't make sense anymore. Now you'll also see I've got a subgrid of contributed ideas. Now this is another place that you can also have a command bar. Now the only item that's visible is the new idea, but if you go to ... you'll see that there's actually several other ones that you can do, and this is one that you can edit and provide new buttons for and actions as you edit using the command bar designer. And finally, if we were to go over to the related and look at the connections or ideas or one of the tables that is related, you'll see the associated view is used. And this is another command bar that you can edit and provide customization to. So that's what we're going to be focusing on, is how to add or change custom command bar items as we go through the course. Now, like I said, the command bar has been around for a while. In fact, let's take a real quick look at the evolution of editing commands on the command bar. Now, this started with just editing the ribbon diff XML. Actually, the commands on the command bar were defined using XML markup language, as you can see in the example here. And it was really something that was very complex to do. Then along came Ribbon Workbench, a community tool that was created by MVP Scott Durow to make editing the commands a lot easier. So you could do all the actions that you could do in the XML in an application visually without having to understand how XML worked and how the structure of the ribbon diff XML. You'll still hear the command bar sometimes called the ribbon. That comes from its history as the ribbon diff XML, or the ribbon that was in the Office application that it was inspired by. And that brings us to today, the preview of the command bar designer that is now integrated into the Maker portal that you can access from the Power Apps model-driven application designer. And in fact, let's not waste any more time and let's jump in and take a look at the new designer. I'm here in the model-driven app designer. I want to show you how easy it is to add a button to the command bar. And we're going to go ahead and add a button to the challenge table. So I'm going to come over here, do ... edit command bar, This launches the command bar designer. It's going to ask me which command bar I want to edit. I'm going to choose the main grid. It'll show me a preview of all the different command bar buttons, and these are ones that if they weren't system, I would be able to edit them, or I could also move them around if they were custom buttons. And what I'm going to do is come up here and add a new command. It adds that based on what I had selected before. I'm going to label this hello bar. This will be our first one that will just be real simple. And what I want to do is when they unselect, I want to give a formula. So this is where you can use PowerFX. So I'm going to use notify. And we're just going to go ahead and say button click. I'm going to go ahead and save and publish. Now also, if I wanted to, I could move this around, so you notice that I can just simply drag this to where I want it. We'll put it after the activate, save and publish again. And this time we'll go ahead and play the application. And we can see that our button is now there. And if we go ahead and click our button, we get the button click notification that we did. Now obviously we did some very simple logic, but in less than 30 or 40 seconds, we were able to add a button without doing any high code or any complicated stuff. And that's what we'll be focusing on as we get deeper into the course, all the things that you can do with the command bar and editing and adding custom logic when somebody clicks the button on the command bar. Now that you've had a quick look at the new designer, let's recap some of the key improvements that it makes. First of all, the modern built-in designer is in the Maker portal. So now I liked Scott's tool as much as anybody else, but I have to admit it's nice not having to worry about downloading something to my local machine and installing it just to edit something that I use other tools to edit. So the built-in designer you'll be able to access from the Maker portal, from the context of the solution, and it's all tracked there without you having to import or export things to get it back after you've made some changes. Being able to use PowerFX to set the visibility and the action logic opens up the ability for a much broader audience to be able to customize command bar buttons and use a language that's familiar with them. Plus, this also highlights Microsoft's PowerFX strategy for using that as the language of choice across the different Power Platform applications, growing on its use that was already there in the Power Apps Canvas app. If you're familiar with using PowerFX in a Canvas app for building the logic there, you'll be already a head start for building command actions and visibility expressions using PowerFX. What we'll spend our time in this module going over is some of the unique aspects of using PowerFX for the command bar visibility and action logic. And if you're a high code developer and like JavaScript, you can still use JavaScript as it makes sense. And one of the things that I really appreciate is that commands are now applied to individual applications. One of the things that you may have found with doing command bar button actions in the past is that was available in all the different applications that used that entity, the form or the grid of that entity had those command bar buttons. Now you can configure them specifically for that individual application and have them only show up in that context. And just like being able to still use JavaScript, being able to have the classic command bar buttons and the modern commands coexist in the same application means that you don't have to rush out and rewrite all your existing logic that you've created in the past on command bar buttons, but you can create new ones using the new features such as PowerFX. Now that you have a good idea of what we're talking about with editing the command bar, let's talk a little bit more about what makes a good command bar button and how to actually go about using this in the Maker portal. Well, of course, you can just jump right in and add a new button, but generally speaking, it's a good idea to think a little bit about what you're doing and design that new command and make sure it fits in with the overall flow of the application. So a good place to start is asking the question of what action does it perform? This will help you identify the logic that you need to create. If you need some JavaScript, or if you need some certain PowerFX expressions, or if you need to add things to the application to make it so you can access that from the logic that you put in the action or the visibility command. Speaking of visibility, when is the button supposed to be visible? When is it supposed to be enabled? When is the user supposed to be able to take that action? And even more importantly, what order is it in the bar? Because if it's something the user uses all the time, you want to make sure it's further to the left side of the bar, easier to access. And if it's something not used as frequently, make sure to move it to the right side so that it can go into the overflow if there's not enough space or there's too many buttons. And you want to make sure to go over what areas you plan to use the button in. Do you need the button from the list of records or only from the detail form? The bottom line is, before you jump in and just add a new button that you haven't thought out very well, take a couple minutes to think about how that new button is going to work and where it's going to go. Now, enough of that. Let's jump in and add some new buttons. I'm here in the Maker portal in an empty solution, and I want to walk you through adding a table, creating an app, and then essentially editing a command bar to add a copy command to the command bar. So we're going to start by adding the new table. And we're going to call this project. Go ahead and create it. Okay, our table's created. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and add a model-driven application. So we'll come up here to add app, model-driven app. We're going to get prompted, do we want to use the classic app designer or the modern app designer? It's important that you use the modern app designer. And this is the same if you are editing an existing application. You want to use the preview of the model application designer because that is where the command bar designer can be found. Call it project management. Go ahead and create it. Now we need to add the table into our application. We'll go ahead and click Add Page. We want a table, view and form based. We're going to search on project. Go ahead and add it. We can see the preview of our project list, and we can see in here where we can expand and see the project form. And if you look on the ... this is how you get into the command bar designer. Click on that. Go ahead and edit the command bar. Save and continue with our app. Make sure it saves our changes. Looks like a little quirk there, so we'll go back, do it again now that we've saved, and it launches the command bar designer. Now we're going to choose which one we want to add the button to. For our example, we'll go ahead and choose the main form, but we've talked about the different locations, and you can see from here, if you click on the different choices, it'll highlight in the picture to show you where it is. So if you ever forget, you don't want to go back and watch this course just to know what form is which or which place is which, you can go ahead and do that by doing that. We're going to choose main form. Go ahead and click edit. And then we see a preview. And now you'll notice that we already have some buttons. Every entity gets a standard set of buttons in the command bar. And these are the starting ones. And you can click around and look at them, but you'll notice that it says this button is read only. This is a preview capability. We hope that they'll allow editing these. This is what allows the classic command bar buttons to coexist with the new command bar buttons that we add from the designer here. You'll notice in here, just to kind of orient you in the designer, you'll notice that you can look at it in the visual view. You can also look at the list of commands over on the left-hand side here. And if I click on one of these, it will highlight that in the visual display, and the properties panel will change to show the different properties for this. And if you look at these, most of them, the action is JavaScript. That's why they're classic commands, because they're using the old style JavaScript to be able to do that. And what we're going to do is go ahead and add a new button. What we're going to do is go ahead and click in here. We'll put it near the activate. So what we're going to do is put our selection there. That way when we go ahead and click the new command button here, that's where it will relatively place our new command on there. And we can see we've got our new command placed right after the one that we had selected. And what you'll do is you'll go ahead and give a label. A label is what displays on the command bar. This is where you want to be as short as possible, but communicate the intent of the button that is being added to the command bar. So we're going to call this copy, because we're going to add a copy project button. Now you can be as wordy as you want, but keep in mind nobody wants to see a button that is a huge long name as it's pulling in there. You'll also notice that the default is no icon, but you'll notice that all the other buttons that are out of the box have an icon on it. So it's kind of silly to not put an icon on there. I think there's very few times that you're going to want to not put the icon on. And the way you do that, you have two options. You can upload a web resource, with your own custom image. But one of the nice things Microsoft has done is they've provided a whole series of images. So if you choose used icon, you'll notice that the list here gives you a whole bunch of different icons that you can choose from without having to upload anything into web resources or be able to choose your own. You can just take one of the standard one. And the good thing about this is also the standard ones are going to be a little bit more something that somebody recognizes. So for my copy, I don't believe there's actually a copy. Well, we'll just go ahead and choose clone. That's probably good enough. And it has a universal symbol for copying, kind of the clone. And that's what we'll go ahead and use for this. Now let's continue on and look at some of these other properties that you can set on the command that we've just added. You can add a tooltip. So this is where we might just say copy a project. And this is displayed when somebody mouses over the button in the command bar to give them an idea of what it does, in case the text like copy isn't enough, because maybe they want to know, is it going to copy the tasks or is it copying the project? We can tell them clearly what it is, and we can elaborate on this in a more full-blown description. And I'm just going to copy the project, and I'm going to expand on this and all tasks. Now, you can also add accessibility text. Now, this is a good idea for what screen readers would be able to see. So make sure to give that. You can also set a order number. This determines the order in the command bar that this will display. This is relative to the other ones. And if you click on another one, you'll notice that this has an order number of 50, and ours that we added has an order number of 55. Now, I could go ahead and change this to 65, and you'll notice that as I did that, it moved from here to over here in the list. I can also change the order by coming over on the visual design surface here and dragging this back to where it was to change the order on there. And it looks like a little quirk because it still kept there we go, let's pull it back. There, so it's a little bit of quirk in there. You'll see it kind of changes some of the time. But the idea is that I can drag that and adjust that order number the same way. Now, the other way you can do this, Microsoft loves to give you multiple ways to do things with the designer, just whatever is convenient for you. So if you come over to the command in the list over here, you can also do a move down or a move up. You can duplicate it, you can hide it, and you can delete it. So you can do things in multiple places in the designer as it makes sense for you. So now that we've got the placement where we want it, adjusted that, always good if you're adding your own buttons. I like to separate things by at least 10 to give some room to add additional buttons. If we've done it sequentially, then it kind of have to shift things around a little bit. So I like to just use 10s as I'm doing things. The next thing you're going to do is choose the action. Now, this is what you want the user to do when the button is clicked on the command bar. The default is run formula, so you'll see that the formula is up there. You can also change this to run JavaScript. Now, we'll have some content later in the course where we go through how to build both the formulas as well as the JavaScript if you want to use some of the existing logic that you have, but you want to use the new designer. I'll show you how to plumb some of that in. Now, for the formula for this one, we're just going to keep this real simple. Now, we could do something fancy, and we will later in the course, but we're just going to copy project goes here. We'll just keep this real simple because I want to focus on all the options that you have in the command bar editor. And the other one that you can do is you can do the visibility. Now, the visibility is defaulted to always show. Now, what that means is that anytime the command bar is there, regardless of the state of the record, the state of the data, whether they have access, it's an active record, it's always going to show that button. The other thing you can do is you can say show on condition from a formula. Now, this allows you to show the formula bar. And just to highlight this, if I say always show, I can come up here and look at the list of behavior properties. I'm only going to see the on select, but as soon as I change this to show on the condition, visible shows up and you have both items on the list. So this is, if you ever need to kind of switch between them, that's how you do. Now I could simply, if I just want to hide it for a while, I could simply just change this to false, and that button will no longer show when the command bar is rendered to the user. But more appropriately, what you can do is you can do a formula, and you might do something like, if it was on a list of records, you might want to make sure they have at least one of the records selected. So you could do a full expression here, and we'll experiment, and I'll go through a number of scenarios, but this is where you basically would put in, maybe you want to just check to see if records are selected, see if a value is been set on the project, maybe the project has been closed is the only time you allow it to be copied. All these rules you can put in and use powerfx logic to kind of determine that. And all that it cares is whether you return true or false, whether the button will be visible. And you'll notice if you scroll all the way down, there's an open formula bar. So if for some reason this isn't opening up, you can click on that to open it. Same thing with the action. So that's our look at the command bar designer, kind of walk through. What we do after this is we go ahead and save and publish. And effectively this sets it up for being available for use in the application. Now, the other thing we can do is we can go ahead and play this. Now we have our projects. Now we didn't add to this bar, we added to the detail bar, the form. So we'll do this as a clean office is our project. Trust me, it's a project. And then when we bring this up and we look at it, and we're not seeing our button. And I'll tell you why, but maybe you already know and you're just laughing at me behind the scenes. But if we come back here and we look at our visible, remember I showed you that this would turn it off. Well, it worked quite well. We'll go ahead and change that to true. Go ahead and save and publish. We'll go ahead and click play, open up a record, and we can see that our copy button has been added. And if we click this, we get our notification. So that's a detailed look at the command bar designer and the process going from creating the application all the way to adding a button and previewing it. Now, before you get too excited about editing the command bar and using powerfx, keep in mind this is preview at this point, and it will be quickly evolving to get to a release state where you can use it on your production projects. Before I turn you loose for the hands-on labs though, I wanted to take a minute to talk about a few of the limitations so you can be aware of what to expect as you're editing the command bar and giving it a try. Now, we thought about just pointing you to the long list of limitations that Microsoft puts on docs, but we thought it would be good to have a little bit of a discussion so you know, for example, if there's a workaround or what to expect. Now, one of the limitations is that the pre-existing classic commands can't be customized with the new command designer. Now, don't worry, you can still use the ribbon workbench, or if you're really hardcore, you can still drop down to the ribbon diff XML to do that. They do plan on making it available, it's just not supported right at this moment. So if you have existing commands or need to work with the existing commands, use one of the other tools. Now remember when I said that one of the key features that I really liked was that the application commands were specific to an application and they didn't bleed over to other applications? Well, the negative of that, for now at least, which to me implies that they have a plan, is there's a limitation that if you create a command in one application and want to use it in a different application or a different location, you must recreate it. One of the things to be aware of is that not all of the out-of-the-box visibility rules from the classic command bar buttons are currently supported. So this means that you may not do as much of the fancy stuff. You may be limited just to using powerfx capabilities. So things like, for example, if you're offline, if you're on certain SKUs or things like that, those may not be available now for you to be able to do. The good news is there's a lot of additional things you can do because powerfx is available and can be used as part of the rule logic. But keep in mind that that is something that you need to do. You may have to go back and not use the new command bar designer and fall back to the traditional ways of editing the buttons. So if you had hopes of being able to dynamically populate buttons, don't get your hopes up because it's not supported. And even worse than that, they said that they don't plan to support it. So if you need to dynamically add buttons, what they recommend doing is pre-creating them declaratively. Then you can use the visibility or the action to filter when it takes effect. Now you might have noticed when you're in the application that there's some command bars that don't show up on the list of command bars that you can edit the buttons on, such as the global application header or dashboard command bars. And they're open to some feedback on this, but right now they don't have support for it. So if you feel that they should add support for that, reach out to Microsoft and let them know by posting it on the IDEA forum. And finally, if you're trying to use the command bar checker with the new buttons that are designed with the new designer, you may find that it doesn't show all the relevant information in some scenarios. Well, I know it's sometimes disappointing to hear there's limitations, but that happens anytime you have preview technology. And don't worry, they'll get it straightened out by the time it releases. Now's a good time to go get your hands dirty, though, and give some feedback to Microsoft. And that's what we're going to do next. We're going to get you into the hands-on labs, where in the first lab, you'll actually set up a new model-driven app using the new designer that has the command bar editor. You'll add a command bar button. Then we'll come back in lab 2 and we'll add several command bar buttons and use PowerFX and see how that works together, running through a number of scenarios using PowerFX to implement the button logic. Well, thanks for joining us, and I'm going to go jump in and give you the information on the labs, and I'll be here to support you as you go through the labs if you have any problems.